Welcome, welcome. This is Dr. Greg Cason. You are here with us on Off the Couch. Off the Couch, psychology for everyday life, a psychology which is going to help us all. I'm here with my pal Zoe, who is an etiquette expert, Zoe Yeoman. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Dr. Greg. Yes, my name is Zoe Yeoman, and I am an etiquette expert and opinionated.
Well, I mean, to do etiquette, you have to have some opinions, I would think.
Right?
But and here also is producer Brian, who's going to be helping us, especially. Hey, Brian. Hey, so let's get, Zoe, I know today is probably not your best day because I heard you went to the World Series. We talked about that last time. And just how did things turn out?
Not well. But that said, not well for the Arizona Diamondbacks. But that said, we had an amazing time. It was a bucket list item, and we had a blast, and I'm really glad we did it. It was great.
Yeah, I'm glad you did it. I think it's an amazing thing to do. So,
Fun. It was really a lot of fun, especially when we still had a chance of winning. And then as that chance got smaller and smaller, everybody started feeling the pain. But this is sports. This is what happens sometimes. So
it is what happens, yeah. But for all the reasons we talked about last week, it's a good thing to do. So, but part of sports, I think, is learning how to lose. And sometimes we lose at the very last yard line, or in this case, the very last inning. Or I didn't watch it, so I shouldn't talk. But in the last game here.
Yeah. Well, what I say is, you win some and you lose more, and that is just life. You win some, but you lose more.
That is a good attitude, actually, because we
take the good with the bad. Yes,
I agree with you. I think learning to be a loser is actually an important thing, and we'll touch on that one day.
Cool.
But Brian here, actually, I wanted to talk with you, Brian, because you said you read something interesting in the New York Times, but what's more interesting to me is actually Veterans Day is coming up. Veterans Day is coming up on Saturday, November 11th, and Brian here is a veteran of the Army.
I am. I really am.
Love that about you, Brian, with a Y.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service, Brian.
Thank you. I always get a little, it's a little cringe for me. I don't know why. I've never had a good time accepting the thank yous or anything like that. Even when I was in the service, I wouldn't go up to like the first class if there were first class seats available. I'd be like, no, it's okay. I'm just doing my duty. Like, I don't need any, reward for it or thanks for it. I don't know. That's just how I thought about it. I always feel so shy.
But a new lesson, you get first class seats?
If there are seats available, they try to get active duty military up front. So that's always nice, but I'm like, I don't need a first class seat. Yeah, but thank you. I truly appreciate that. But the New York Post did post something on Instagram. I saw their post that they are just about to finish having these metal nets under the bridge, which will help prevent suicides from occurring on the bridge, which I think is actually really cool. I saw that it's over 2,000 people that have committed suicide on the bridge already, and yeah, they made it this way so it would still be appealing. You can't really see the nets unless you're like 20 feet away from the net. So I think that's going to be a huge lifesaver, literally, for everybody. So pretty excited about that.
It's wonderful.
It is actually wonderful. I love to hear that. And I think it's funny, the Golden Gate Bridge is kind of meaningful to me. And I will just tell the story a little quickly. I had a client who actually... this was a few years back, and anyway, long story short, this client had driven to the Golden Gate Bridge and was walking out onto it with plans to jump over the bridge. And this was someone, I won't go into the whole story, but one thing happened that was really miraculous to me, and I don't think the netting is one thing, but they actually have a staff of people and trained police officers who patrol the bridge and look for people who are going to jump. And one thing they do is that they intercept those people, take them and talk to them, and they talk to them for as long as they need and contact people and help them to get back on track. And she credits it for helping her to be able to stave off that desire. And now this client is extremely successful. So it's really kind of a wonderful. I actually have good feelings about the people there in San Francisco.
Good news. Thanks for sharing that, Brian.
No, thanks. I mean, it happens so much, and it's something that, we need to be a lot more aware about, where you could be on the bridge and maybe have that little thought, but if you're actually going to the bridge with intention of doing more than that, it just gets a little scary, Even if you're not in that mindset, it's still a scary thought to even cross your mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We want our people to be well. Mental health is so important, and I'm so glad that we talk about it now and that it's an actual issue that's out in the world now. I think had that been the case, I would not have lost my mother and my brother
I'm
to
sorry.
suicide.
So, I didn't know that, Zoe. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I also run a theater company. It's one of the things that I do. And it is hard as it can be to sit and watch shows about, that have that kind of thing in them. It's so important that we all know about it now, because for so long, no one talked about it. No one talked about mental health issues at all. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, and I'm on the same page, and I'm sorry that that you've gone through that and your family has. Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, mental health has changed over the years, and when I first got into it, a lot of people made fun of me, said very shameful things, like, oh, you can't hack it some other way, and blah blah blah, and I was from a very early age very fascinated with mental health, and I could talk about that sometime. A lot of it has to do with growing up with a brother who is developmentally disabled and dealing with people who are different, but also having other things, to deal with. But what is so miraculous to me is to watch the change happen where now people talk about mental health as important needs. And I even saw Glenn Youngkin, who's the governor of Virginia, on an interview saying that behavioral health, which is mental health, behavioral health is a priority for his state. And I thought, this is absolutely miraculous. We already heard it from the White House very directly, but some states are dragging their feet a little bit. So it's always nice to hear a governor stand up and say how important it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So unfortunately, we need to kind of change gears here a little bit, folks, because Zoe, I'm especially curious about something. What is your response when you see a text when they say, you're beautiful, let's say, and which is nice, but you spell it Y-O-U-R?
Oh, my response is somebody didn't pay attention in the 7th grade.
Or when they say there, but they spell it when they like their horse, but they spell it T-H-E-R-E.
Look, the grammar, there's two things. If you're voice to texting, then you are going to have more of those mistakes. Sometimes people are just not good spellers. They just aren't. And they miss that, or their brain.
What happens to you when you hear that?
I give them the benefit of the doubt because I'm a nice person.
Very sweet of you. I'm sensing Brian does not give them the benefit of the doubt. What happens, Brian?
Maybe because I've had to work with a lot of professionals, so I've been kind of like slapped on the hands with certain grammar stuff that I'm like, it's like a habit for me to where when I'm even looking at memes online to like repost or something on my story, I hate when they're not like correct grammatically, because then I'm like, I don't want to post it because now I look dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the two and two is awful. Irregardless when people should be saying regardless. Saying they is rather than they are. Or saying literally when they mean figuratively, like I literally died. Well, if you literally died, you wouldn't be here right now talking to me. So all of those things can be really grating on us. And now there's a scientific reason. There's a scientific, maybe not reason, but we're actually able to measure it. So that's why I wanted to ask about this. It's really common for all of us to have those reactions to poor spelling, bad grammar, the whole thing. And there's a study out of the University of Birmingham in England that said our bodies go into stress mode when we're hearing misused grammar. And that was published in the Journal of Neurolinguistics, which is a good journal. So they found a direct correlation between instances of bad grammar and the subject's heart rate, or hearing bad grammar and the subject's heart rate. And this was really interesting to me because our heart rates kind of have a natural variability when we're at rest, just sort of like it's doing its thing. But when we start to get stressed, it starts to become more even and paced. Basically, we activate that sympathetic nervous system inside of us that starts to prepare us for fight or flight. And that happens when we hear bad grammar, and that may be why you had that reaction, Brian. It helps. It helps us to know we need to pay attention. So bad grammar actually gets our attention more. Like, remember the Apple slogan? What was it? Think different. I will tell you, every single time I saw that, it bugged me so much because what should it be?
Think differently.
That's right. Think differently, because that is an adverb. Maybe a little picky on my part, but wow, did that bother me for all those years. That was a slogan they used, but it was very effective for them. So
from an etiquette expert's point of view,
yes,
bad grammar, using proper grammar, using bad grammar tells people how educated you are or how uneducated you are. And that doesn't necessarily mean formal education, but it also says that you have self-respect as well as respect for others. So there's the etiquette stick on that particular issue.
Well, actually, that's very helpful because as someone who only went to public schools, I'm 100% public school educated, all the way through my PhD and fellowship, the whole thing, 100%. So, I know I don't have, maybe I have good schooling. Certainly my graduate schooling was among the best, but I went to UCLA undergrad, so had good schooling. But, one never knows. You're plopped into those public schools and you can get just any number of varieties of training, plus people adapt their language to kind of mold to the people they're around. So I grew up in a beach community, and in some ways I had to train the beach out of myself. Like, instead of saying dude all the time and whatnot, I had to kind of stop myself from doing that. And that, to me, is part because, just to have me be more professional, I had to do that. But the other is, it made me think, what's the psychological purpose of this? And it made me think that perhaps it helps us detect people who are not in our tribe, who are not like us. So when we hear people speaking like us, we know we connect to them more easily. And when we see people or hear people speaking not like us, we might feel more threat. So kind of, I don't know, but but we certainly see a preparation of threat going on physiologically when people do hear bad grammar.
Well, if it's affecting one's heart rate, that's pretty interesting.
And the thing that really fascinated me too is I had to think, this is kind of like Karen syndrome, which I don't know is a thing. I made that up. But when someone is more of a Karen, like when they are, we have a lot of videos of a certain person in Santa Barbara here who is going up to like people selling tacos on the street or gardeners and threatening to send them back to their country, etc. And you're like, what is the threat? These people are just working. But maybe when she talks to them, she starts to get very activated. I don't know.
Maybe she needs to see someone.
Maybe she does. I think she's seeing a court, actually. Poor thing is having to endure a lot of backlash, I think, including legal. So interesting, though. Now, the next article was I thought also really helpful because as someone who tends to be goal oriented and I'm always trying to achieve goals, anger can be a powerful motivator to help us achieve goals. This was by some research at Texas A&M University, and it was in one of the very best psychology journals. So, when it's in a journal of this stature, we tend to look twice. This was in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And what this said, and it really made a lot of sense to me because it went with what's called the functionalist theory of emotion. This is something I actually practice, that I actually look at the function of emotion. I just don't look at emotion. A lot of people think emotion is bad or it's counterproductive or you should only feel good. We had a lot of that representation with a book that was popular about, 20 years ago called The Secret, which I think did a lot of harm. And a lot of people thought they had to feel good all the time in order to have a good and prosperous life. And in fact, that is quite the opposite of what we know. We know that emotions serve a biological and evolutionary function, and that our emotions actually help us to achieve goals. So basically, this theory is there's a situation, something happens, we interpret that situation, our brain makes sense of it, and then you feel an emotion. And that emotion tells you what to do. Let's say if you're frightened, it may tell you to avoid the situation or to escape the situation or to fight the situation. Maybe you're backed into a corner and just have to do something. So different emotions can actually lead us different places. Do you guys find this to be true?
I actually do. I'm very emotional. So over the years, I've learned to control and use my emotions in a beneficial way. So when I run in the military, when we would have our physical readiness tests, we would have to run a certain amount of miles in a certain amount of time. I would make sure I would get angry enough because the anger would make me just run it as good as I possibly could. The anger, and it's funny because I sometimes would curse at myself just to get the anger going. And sometimes my sergeants would be like, all right, no cursing on this run. There's certain people that are higher up that you can't be just out here, cursing while you're running. But also with just certain tests or any things that I had to go through trainings where I'm I would use the anger to make sure that I was gonna do really well. I would think of the people that were counting on me to fail or the people that were rooting for me to win, and those emotions would literally push me to do really well in certain tests or anything in life really. So that's how I've been able to work with them.
I like to think that I'm healthier because I do get angry. I do let it out. And I do realize at the same time, however, that I don't want to go to jail and I don't want to hurt anyone else. I don't want to get sued. I don't want to lose everything I've worked for these years. But I use my anger for good.
Use it for good rather than evil. That's good.
You bet I do.
Well, one thing I like to differentiate when I work with clients is to anger to me is on a continuum, and it's a broad continuum. And maybe it starts with irritation and it escalates, frustration, then maybe irritation, then it escalates. Maybe we can put anger in there. Yeah, but anger to me is the umbrella term. But the place we don't want to get, which you just alluded to, Zoe, which is rage. And rage actually causes us to want to destroy things.
Oh, that's a different thing. Okay.
Yeah, and actually people I work with who have rage, I ask them some specific questions. It's always very telling, which is if they'll say they go to a store and they scream at the cashier at the store and they knock over some items and they storm out and get very angry. And I'll say, oh, wow, tell me. And basically we get to, and then I ask them, would you do that if a police officer were standing there in front of you? Would you do that if your mother was right there in front of you and looking at you? So usually they stop and they're like, no, I wouldn't have done that. because of consequence. One is humiliation from the mother watching, and the other is police officer, and there could be a legal consequence.
You're going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, we know they're not able to control their rage. There are people that cannot stop themselves when a police officer or a family member is there. And they have some very, very serious problems. But we're going to talk about that a little later, just a little heads up. The other thing is, so when I look at anger, by the way, that irritation can help us to achieve our goals. That's the place I think is really helpful to be. It helps you to seek resolution, to take action, and to avoid problems, because you want to cut through the crap and just get there. But rage is going to cause you destruction. Now, I want to go into an example that in these surveys, this was really interesting to me. We have these presidential elections that are becoming more and more heated. Surveys were done in 2016 and 2020 presidential election, and they found that people who, I'll just read the finding. If they could be angry, if they would be angry that their candidate did not win, they were more likely to vote. So if they were going to pissed off that their candidate did not win, they were more likely to actually vote. But it didn't have an effect on which candidate they voted for. It's just if their candidate wouldn't win.
Okay.
Yeah, thought that was interesting. Also, anger helps you to increase your effort toward achieving your goals, resulting in greater success, but it's not associated with easy goals. So if you have easy goals, anger is not going to really help you.
Yeah.
The other emotions that help us to achieve goals are goals like emotions like amusement and desire, and those can be operational in the easier goals as well. Gotcha. So anger really only helps you when it's a big goal, like you're really fighting to get there. But Brian, I don't know about cursing at myself. I think that would actually be counterproductive in my case, because I would just feel guilty.
No, just the cursing itself gets me upset. So I know the little triggers to make that little anger spark just enough to get me going where I need to go.
Gotcha. Rage. I never thought of that. That's pretty fascinating. That is a different level.
It is a different level, and one perhaps we all could do best to avoid. And people who demonstrate a great deal of rage a lot, it tends to snowball for them. So they tend to anger faster and more easily than other people. And they may have the philosophy, I'm just letting it out, but actually what we see is the problem gets worse and worse. So
that's where some self-control needs to come in, and I have that. So I don't ever really go, I would never do that in public, really, unless somebody was, I don't know, coming after me or something. But
well, that's when you need it. That's why it's there within every single one of us.
Gotcha.
These emotions are all there. It's a matter of, do you use them in a way that's helpful to you or in a way that's harmful to you and other people?
Yeah.
And actually, this would be, this is a good one for us to look at. But anger can actually help us sometimes. And that was what we call a healthy negative emotion.
Yes, I have that sometimes.
Sometimes. Okay, now, now I wanted to talk about, there was a study done. This was really it just bugs me when I see on social media all these good bodies just showing off their skin and showing how amazing they are. And, I work out hard. I go to the gym. I try my best. I eat poorly, but, we can't have it all. But this Journal of Health Communication actually found that a few words of body appreciation can counter the negative effects of viewing objectified images of female fitness instructors. It was specifically done with female fitness instructors. This was a study out of Washington State University. And basically an example of a body appreciation message is, love your body, see what it can do. And then you can put that next to the sexy pose.
I do not put sexy poses on social media.
Yeah, I tend not to do so either, but some people do.
Yes.
But it's the difference between objectified and not objectified. And objectified are where people are showing off their body in some sexual or particular way, or maybe just a body part. And you could, when you see it, it's they're enticing pictures. But the trainer, or let's say fitness instructor, fitness influencer, can be dressed exactly the same in just as sexy of an outfit. But if they're not objectifying, they're just demonstrating an exercise, or they're not standing in a sexual way, we tend to view that in a non-objectified way. So it's really the objectified ones that cause the problem.
Yes. It's funny, I don't have any of those issues personally. Like, as a woman, we fight with all kinds of things, and age and gravity and the whole thing. I just kind of go, oh, she's got a nice figure. And I just keep going. Like, it doesn't affect me at all. It doesn't, the body shaming thing. Like, I'm very grateful that I don't have any of those kind of issues.
Well, you're very fortunate. It's a plague in our society, especially for young women.
For young women, yes.
And it causes...
I didn't have it then either. When I was skinny, I was just skinny, and it didn't bother me, but I'm fortunate sometimes. Yeah,
that is very fortunate. So I never argue with good mental health, so I'm not going to say you should have that by any means, but it does plague a lot of people. And it's certainly a large part of social media that we see, and it's what's hurting especially middle schoolers, not middle-agers, maybe us too, but the middle schoolers and high schoolers who start to think they have to present themselves in overly objectified ways in order to get people to notice them or like them, and that the way they look is somehow inferior to these gods who are presenting on social media.
I feel so much for those kids.
Yeah.
I really, really do.
Well, it causes a lot of problems: anxiety, eating disorders, depression. We can go into it, basically, and we'll maybe go into this. This is more what we would call a downward comparison, where they see someone else who appears very negative or appears better than them, and they compare themselves. They look at themselves as less. I'm sorry, it's an upward comparison. They're looking at someone who's better, and they see themselves as less than that person. So
just want to hug them all. Just want to hug them.
I know.
They don't pay attention. Don't feel that way. Can't tell anybody how to feel though. But it's sad.
You can't tell anyone how to feel. That's true. It's good just to be empathic. Brian, you've seen this? You're more on these things, more on the. You're laughing.
I am
you're
on
bursting.
Social media a lot, so I get to see it, like both men and women, and I'm thankful enough to be at a good point in my life that I'm like, okay, but I also do work out a lot. I do take care of myself, and even then, there's still some posts I see, and I'm like, you don't look that good, and it sucks to even think that, but it's like.
About yourself?
About myself. Oh. And so I can't even imagine what younger people, like in high school, middle school, like I'm terrified to how their brains are like processing everything, because if I can still feel this way and still feel a little insecure every once in a while, you can only imagine what they're going through. And that's a scary one.
Well, basically, I have a theory that if we look at a picture of ourselves from 10 years ago, we're gonna wish that we had felt the way we do about that picture now. That we look at that picture from 10 years ago and go, God, that person, look how good they looked. And instead, we're often putting ourselves down in the moment. So it's good for us, I think, sometimes even to feel good about ourselves in the current moment. But I thought this actually was meaningful research, because there is such a plague of a problem. Because if you put a positive message, it seems to help people in the moment to digest your somewhat suggestive pose and not put themselves down quite as much. It helped them have more self-compassion. It did not raise their self-esteem. So, which is a little different. That's their view of themselves. But it helped them feel more forgiving of themselves for what they see, and maybe.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
So there is something that I've noticed when people like post their failures or like their journey through it, because a lot of people don't see the whole process. They don't see the years that it's taken these people to build and look this way, or the food they eat, or the sacrifice that they have to give up, in order to look a certain way and perform a certain way. So when you see the actual truth instead of like the perfection image, picture, video, or anything, then you truly get to see like, wow, that's a real person. Like there's like the actual human being that you can identify with instead of just seeing the perfect image, That's where it gets a little lost too.
One thing that was really interesting, there was another piece of research here, and that was in the same journal but earlier. And this piece of research said that sexually objectified posts, the ones we talked about with no message underneath, they resulted in fewer likes. So if anything, in this like-driven culture, maybe people can start to think about how to put their posts in a little bit better of a light, and maybe that will get them more likes. I think they may be going for envy, and some people like it when other people envy them, but ultimately the cash crop here is likes with these posts. So
And then making money. Yeah. I wonder if people are kind of over that stuff now. Like are
Nope.
we a little over it, you think?
Well, there's definitely, I certainly see that in myself. I've had to take a social media break, which came at a very fortunate time in our world. I got very sick of it. I had a tough time, and it wasn't mean or bad to anyone, but I just needed to take a break from it, and it was a very natural thing. But I think that a lot of people, because we've had such saturation, and that social media drives people to think in more polarized ways or a black and white way, as opposed to having more nuance or understanding texture, that social media is actually causing people more harm than good overall. I think it's unfortunate because social media could be a very good thing, but darker forces, especially algorithms, which want to drive people to like things or to get outraged by things, those algorithms drive those posts that do that. Because if the more you fear or the more you feel anger, the longer you're going to spend on something, the more you're going to engage with it. If somebody just puts up lovely poems, you might like to go to that site, but it isn't going to have the emotional intensity that something that makes you fear will have. So, yeah. Now, this kind of concerned me, though, this next finding. It's just a real quick. CDC said more than half of U.S. adults use the internet to look for health and medical information. They said actually 58.5% of people, and more women than men, are seeking health information on the internet. Now, I'm fine with this in general. I mean, I love to consult Dr. Google all the time. And look up things and learn things, and I like to do it. But one thing I noticed is that I will always seek out reputable journals, reputable sites. I don't try to just take somebody's word. I, in fact, try to learn from them, from really reputable sites, and I look for confirmation, too. I don't think everyone does that. I think sometimes people just go on the internet and they just read a blog post, and they think that's somehow fact.
No. Stay off the web.
Stay off Dr. Google. Do you consult Dr. Google when you feel something, Zoe?
Almost never. But when I do believe it's because I already kind of know what's up, and it's verification.
Okay. And then you can bring that perhaps to your physician.
Yeah.
I always think it's good to consult a health professional, but I'm extremely biased in that. And I think this really bothers me specifically as a mental health professional because people are constantly coming in with a self-diagnosis of ADHD. There are people who really have ADHD. They really are. But I actually can assess someone for ADHD, and this has been since I started my career. But the overwhelming majority, it's not ADHD. It's due to something else. It's inattention due to many things. And in fact, now with social media, our inattention is much higher. and our frustration tolerance much lower. So it's actually a big problem.
I want to give you an example.
Yeah.
I have never had laryngitis. I have never lost my voice ever in my entire life.
Uh-huh.
And recently I started
struggling.
getting hoarse.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, is this another one of, my first instinct was, do I have COVID? And so I looked it up, and being hoarse, and you can hear it right now a little bit, is a sign of long COVID, which I am pretty sure I have.
You have long COVID.
Verification, yes.
Oh, well, we'll come back to that on another show because I'm very interested in that. That's actually can be very problematic for people.
Not debilitating, like for many people, not like to that extreme, but there are some symptoms that I'm dealing with.
Well, for those who notice that my voice is a little crackly today, I took a COVID test and I'm negative. But but no, it's a real thing. Who knows what's going on. But I wanted to move and ask you guys, I wanted to talk about something. Zoe, you brought this to me a couple of weeks ago. We were just chatting and you saying you knew about the dark triad. And this is something that, again, I'm confronted with this in my practice. People talk about this and I see it a lot in social media. And it became concerning to me that The Atlantic did a big article about it, and it was the #1 article when it appears, recognizing the sociopaths among us. So, and it really dealt with the dark triad personality. So I'm like, okay, we just have to deal with this. It was also concerning to me because I remember during the Trump years, people would always, because I'm a mental health professional, they'd say, oh, this mental health professional said he has malignant narcissism, which isn't a diagnosis. It's kind of a colloquial diagnosis to mean this dark triad thing, but that's not even a diagnosis. It's really a descriptor. But people would always come into me and want to talk about the dark triad, so I thought that might be something good for us to focus on. Yeah, wow. I know, weird.
With regard to themselves or someone else?
No, I'll tell you why, and I think it's because people are concerned about people in their lives, and I'm that's important, but sometimes we have to be careful about mixing clinical with normal. And clinical levels can be extremely high before we give someone a diagnosis, where there is normal level of all these things in every one of us.
Okay.
So let me talk about the dark triad, and I want to hear your reaction too, Brian. But the traits of dark triad are being self-important, a sense of entitlement, vanity, victim mentality, and I want to talk about that more. Bend the truth or lying, manipulative, grandiose, lack of remorse, and lack of empathy. Yeah, but let's look at this. Let's put up the dark triad. Thank you, Tony. All right, so there it is. So this is actually something to kind of talk about what the dark triad is. It's psychopathy, which is analogous to a diagnosis called antisocial personality disorder. But psychopathy is being impulsive, emotionally cold, remorseless. These are the people that you really have a lack of empathy. And they put even examples of body language are lacking emotional expression. They can appear rather cold. Narcissism, which is grandiosity, perceived superiority, entitlement. These are the me people. Example body languages are first-person pronouns, always saying me, I, and focusing on yourself in conversations. And you could see all of us have some of this sometimes with some people. And then Machiavellianism. I want to talk about this, being manipulative, self-interested, domineering. Machiavellianism doesn't have an analogous diagnosis, but example, body language is dominant, expansive posture, etc. And they actually had an article, and when I first read this article in the Atlantic, I thought, oh, this is just too simplistic, etc., etc. I reread the article, and then I'm like, actually, it's pretty good. They just kind of boil it down to the basics. So I had a little bit of a flip in that. And I think it's just my emotional reaction of always dealing with this particular thing. But I think there's something left out of the dark triad, which I talked to you about, Zoe, before, which is sadism. And sadism is identified in what's called the dark tetrad. So that would be those three: Machiavellianism, narcissism, psychopathy, and then adding sadism, or taking joy or pleasure in the suffering of others.
Wow,
And
so
this
dark.
Yeah, it is. This is not a fun person to be around. But let's go over this really quickly. This is also called a malignant narcissist. We heard that term a lot. We talked about that. Delroy Pohlhaus and Kevin Williams in 2002 identified this concept. So I didn't even learn about it going through graduate school. Careers they often prefer. Now watch out, Zoe. They prefer human contact. And they like performance and applause, but little concern for other people. So, what are the professions does that sound like, you guys?
Actors?
Yeah, actors certainly. Well, anyone in show business, probably shoe business.
Influencers, maybe.
Influencers, probably. Yes.
I was going to say there's a big feel of that in LA. So.
Politicians.
So those tend to be the big ones. Yes, excellent. They have a tendency to exaggerate the truth. They're distrustful of colleagues. They act impulsively and irresponsibly. They break rules and lie. And they tend to really, and you were right on, Brian, they tend to really hog social media. They tend to really overuse it. And that's because they're in control there. They're in control.
Oh.
And they can actually create a lot of harm and destruction. So we think that a lot of the people who are trolls or the people who are anonymous, abusive, and they whip up hatred and controversy, if they're not a Russian bot, they're probably a troll. And that troll is they're just trying to inflame other people.
You know who I thought was the biggest troll, and I'm going to say her name because I haven't forgiven her yet.
Okay.
Who's that woman who was married? Who's the woman who's married to John Legend?
Oh, Chrissy Teigen? Yeah. Brian's laughing.
A lot of people don't like her.
So mean and heartless and ugly and just awful. And I felt bad for him. I thought, look who you married.
I'm fairly unfamiliar with. I didn't know anything about this. I know she's an ex-model.
I know she's asked for forgiveness and blah, 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 and all of that, and let everybody else forgive you. I'm not going to forgive you.
Well, you can welcome not to, but I always love when someone asks for forgiveness. I think that is the social connectivity. When people make mistakes, they ask forgiveness. So what was coming
it's
up for
only
you,
after
Brian?
she got canceled 15 times, but okay, Dr. Ware.
If she got canceled 15 times, she obviously came back at least 14. But
With apology videos.
Right?
What was your reaction, Brian? You didn't like her either, or you had a reaction?
I don't really care for her, but I know a lot of people dislike her. There's a lot of things that she does that can seem annoying, very annoying, at least to me. And I know that she's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and yeah.
Ryan's being very kind.
I am trying.
He's being very kind. And I hate to cry ignorant here. I feel so bad. I do like his music, and I thought they're a beautiful couple, and I tend not to pay attention to gossip stuff. I don't like it. So that leaves me out of a lot of fun, I think. But you're going to feel good. You're going to have a little schadenfreude, but it doesn't mean that you are a sadistic personality disorder, which is not even a thing, but proposed. Anyway, but they are not very successful. They're not usually successful in life, although some, it's like maybe Chrissy Teigen, go the opposite, and she's quite successful. They're not really capable leaders because you can see how they destroy things. They don't have close friends, and they tend to have lower than average life satisfaction. So there is some maybe some good stuff here that maybe their life isn't all I don't know.
Oh, it
triumphs.
can't be right.
They're the people who see the world as winners and losers. I mean, they see, and if they're not a winner, then they're a loser, and they think you're a loser if they step on you or hurt you. I mean, this is really, they can be quite dark. But what was great about this article is they pointed out that 50% of people in an international sample are actually the light triad. That's as compared to 7%, which I think is an overestimation, who have dark triad. But this is light triad. They said 50% met this light triad, which is faith in humanity, feeling like people generally have the best interests in mind. Humanism, which is dignity and worth of your fellow humans. And universal moral law. This is basically do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Also, the refusal to use other people. Would you guys say you're light or dark? Or in between?
You have to ask?
Are you the gray triad? No, I think that's basically how I see people. Yeah, but certainly we see the ugly side in psychology sometimes.
I hope I've never met that person.
I
might have
I guarantee you have.
Probably have.
You just may not have spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah, I try not to be around those type of people, especially in like our community and in LA, and it seems a little superficial a lot of the times and vain, and nobody really truly cares about each other. You know, like the whole influencer world is very much like what you were describing, I would say.
Ugh, influencer, It sounds, I don't know if people are that bad. Hey, I wanted to point out just something very quickly. This is something, I just want to say that in the LA Times in the calendar section, this was on last Friday. They had an article called Not Okay Boomers, and it had Eric Clapton on it. And I don't think this is Dark Triad, by the way. This is just something else. And so, but it was really interesting to me. It was about all these baby boomers who were so counterculture. And now that culture has gone perhaps their way in the 60s, now they're counterculture to that. So they've gone extreme right or conservative. And I just thought it was rather interesting. I mean, we could go into this, but like Eric Clapton headlined for Robert F. Kennedy at a private event who says that vaccines cause autism. The COVID-19 virus was designed to infect Ashkenazi Jews and the Chinese. Also, Jan Wenner, who was the guy who started Rolling Stone and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and this is a pretty amazing rock and roll history guy. He wrote a book that only featured white men. Did you hear about this, Zoe?
Jan Wenner, yes.
Yeah, Wenner. Yeah, and he only featured white men. And when asked about this, he said that people of color aren't sufficiently articulate or intellectual, and women too, women and people of color. So that was a big. That was. I mean,
there's no equivocation there. We know.
No equivocation. Pink Floyd co-founder Roger Waters has said anti-Semitic remarks, said Russia invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked. I mean, we can just go on and on. It really kind of shocked me a little bit.
Just because they're famous doesn't mean they're smart.
No, that's very...
common sense.
That part. Yes.
What? I'm sorry, Brian?
And I'm like, that's correct. Like, she hit it right on the mark. Like,
just because they're famous doesn't mean they're smart. And in fact... The interesting thing in the article is the fans were like, yeah, they say crazy things, I just don't pay attention, which I thought was the healthiest attitude.
Well, this is the boomer thing, right? So social progression is fueled in large part by generational tension.
And that, I think, is a real thing. So it could be generational tension. I think people don't like a changing world. But as we get older, we tend to feel more vulnerable. And that's something that I noticed once in myself when I went to an amusement park and I had a leg injury that I couldn't walk around easily, but I still wanted to go on the rides. And I didn't want to go on one of the big roller coasters. This was a few years back because I felt too vulnerable. And it had nothing to do. I would be strapped in. But I felt like what if I needed to escape and I couldn't like walk down those ramps from high up or something like that. And I thought, how interesting. I feel so vulnerable. I want to be more conservative. And I've seen this throughout my life that when people feel more vulnerable, they tend to be more conservative. So I wonder if just aging, feeling threat in the world, getting older, generational tension, other things are causing people to feel more vulnerable.
I do think that it's very similar to when I was growing up, when we were growing up, which was the hippies, the this, the that, you guys are never going to amount to anything, you're ruining the country, blah, blah, blah. It just seems to happen every time.
It does seem to happen. I was just, I'm outside of that particular of the hippies, but I remember being a little kid and looking at that whole thing and thinking,
Why are they so angry?
I never thought that. I don't know why, but I mean, I just used to think like they were like the people who came and babysat us, so they seem cool. But
well, you were a beach guy, so I was, all over the country, all over the world, and I was like Kent State, and these people are throwing rocks and all the stuff, and as a kid, you don't really understand where all the anger is coming from. But
so you were at Kent State?
Maybe our whole like Portland thing. What was that?
Yeah, the Portland thing was another thing, and yeah, we could go into those, but
like they're blowing off their steam, right? That's what a lot of Wall Street thing.
Well, we can talk about that, and I think that it might go into what we called earlier, which is rage, which causes very counterproductive emotions or any kind of non-functional emotion.
So we had that in the 60s and the 70s.
In the 70s and, all the time. I hate to go. I just thought that was kind of fun. Little article. By the way, they had some contrasting that Neil Young and Joni Mitchell pulled their songs from Spotify because of Joe Rogan's program because he presented misinformation. I mean, he's like an engine of misinformation. It's kind of funny. So they pulled their catalogs off. So not every, senior rocker is falling into this category, but I just thought it was kind of an interesting thing. So
it was in the news. It's a thing that's happened, and we should talk about it, Dr. Greg.
We should always talk about it, but there was an etiquette thing Brian came across, which we thought we could talk about.
Yes. So on the advice column section of the Washington Post, they had it was a topic about using non-binary people's correct pronouns and in like the workplace, and I have friends that are both trans and non-binary and both trans and non-binary. So it's getting to a point where yes, we can talk about it, yes, we can try to have conversations, but it gets to a point with certain people where they just don't care to put in the effort or to learn or to just address somebody properly. And there's certain ways you can address people properly without knowing their proper pronoun, I feel like. But it gets to the point, like, how do you address the ones that really just don't care at that point,
I think like so many things in life, we have to take a minute to try to teach people things. Mm-hmm. So, it's a process of sharing information and not jumping to victimhood and not being cocksure that someone's trying to offend you or is trying to embarrass or hurt you or belittle you for some reason. Working in the theater, this is something I've had to learn that never was before for any of us. And so we are very careful and we do our best. And as time goes by, I think people will be able to step up appropriately and properly. That's what I think.
Well said. Well said. I had some psychology takes on this. Of course, when we talk about gender, we talk about gender and a spectrum versus a light switch. We talk about the people identify internally, and they're somewhere on a spectrum. We also know that identity also identifies and exists on a spectrum, but we have fewer words. So we have boy, girl, and now non-binary, and we have a few other things, perhaps, what we do. But the bottom line is that, you're exactly right, Zoe. I think we have to take time to teach people, and we have to do it in a particular way. So, this kind of called up for me something, a skill that I think is probably one of the most important skills that we all have, which is to have generosity of spirit, acting with kindness, being open and willing to share with others without expectation of receiving something back in return, and to celebrate the success and efforts of others without envy or resentment. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, when you do something like you identify as non-binary when you were once identifying earlier as binary, people were going to make that mistake, or if you now have switched your name, that this is going to be a process. You went through a process, I always say with people. You went through a coming out process or an identity development process that's been going on for years and years. This person is just learning it, and their brain might have some difficulty. So it's good to have generosity of spirit and just remind them, oh yeah, I prefer to be called they, etc. It really identifies the preference, and that gentleness and embracing actually helps people want to do what you're asking. Where if you address them in a negative way, they're going to feel punished by you.
And this is the whole you catch more bees with honey. Like everybody knows that, that's the way to do it. You don't have to be condescending. You don't have to be, ugly or mean about it. Just, try to educate, especially for older people. I think it's taking some time. And it was interesting in that article that we're talking about,
Uh-huh.
the take your concern to HR. You don't have to talk to somebody, face to face. If you're having an issue in the office, then you should talk to, HR.
We need to talk to somebody. If you don't feel trust with your supervisor, because I would think that would be the first step, then perhaps go to HR. But by that point, we're having it moves out of a generosity of spirit and moves into, here comes the hammer.
Right.
So it's a different thing, and we do have to be on the lookout for people who have more negative intentions, who are being passive aggressive, who know better, who say things. That, of course, is a different thing altogether. But
that happens whether you're a silver-haired lady or a black man.
It does happen to everybody, and some people more than others, unfortunately.
In different ways.
Hey, we need to end. I thank you so much, you guys. Oh. I know we had really quite a show with a lot of stuff. Thank you so much. Thank you, Zoe, our etiquette expert, Zoe Yeoman, and thank you, Brian, producer Brian Gomez. We really appreciate you guys being here, and thank you all. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Dr. Greg. Bye, Brian.
Good to see you. Bye. Remember, everyone, be kind, be flexible, and what was my last one? Oh, be present. Take on all three, and you'll have a good day.